Welcome back, everyone, to the Earthdawn Survival Guide, a podcast for novices, journeymen, wardens, and masters. I am here. I am Dan, and my co-host, of course, is always Josh.
Hello.
The other master of Earthdawn. And on today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things locational, vocational, geographic, and probably mechanical if we have time to get to it, because today we are going to talk about Parlainth.
Yes.
In detail.
Forgotten City.
Yes, and we did not forget. But if you have any questions for us about anything you'd like to talk about, we answered some emails last episode. It seems to be about every 2 or 4 that we get to them. But by all means, email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com. And yeah, today is all about the Forgotten City, which featured heavily into the first novel, The Longing Ring for Earthdawn, that set the stage. It has its own little, I can't say little, massive boxed set as well, and then a standalone campaign setting, the Parlainth Adventures book from the original first edition, which had 4 not exactly linked adventures in there as well.
Did it have 4?
It had, I know there was 3.
I was going to say, I thought there were 3, but it could have been 4.
Blood-Packed, Dead Man's Hand, Desire Box, and Threads.
So yeah, okay. 4. So there were 4.
Fair.
It is also
look it up, so.
Yep, it is also the setting focus for the Legends of Earthdawn campaign series that we have been releasing chapters of here over the past several months, and will continue to do so for several more.
Absolutely. It is a very, very important part of Barsaive's history as far as the Scourge is pre-Scourge, during the Scourge, and then after. So it is important, I think, more in the sense of what it represents in terms of both the hubris of the Therans and the sheer destructive capability of the horrors. No argument. That is it, and it also provides a scope of what the culmination of ritual magic can do, because Parlainth took a different tactic than everybody else. We should kind of start there. We kind of briefly covered it in our discussion of the timeline,
right?
Over many, many episodes of the podcast. But Parlainth took a different tack. They said, nope, tell you what, we're going to do the old switcheroo, the Scooby-Doo magical door behind the grandfather clock. So when the horrors come here, we'll go there, and they won't notice that we're gone, because we're also, by the way, going to wipe out everyone's memory of even the name Parlainth and that we ever existed at all, and leave little clues here and there that somebody will eventually find and clue in on and solve this mystery to bring us back.
Yes.
And so they bamped out of existence into astral space.
Yep. Parlainth was the former Theran provincial capital. It was the seat of Theran power in Barsaive prior to the Scourge. And then, as Dan said, they decided rather than build the traditional citadel, they thought that it would be better for them to remove the city from the physical plane entirely and go off into its own little pocket astral dimension in order to completely hide away from the horrors, on the idea being that they would safely wait out the Scourge, and then when it was over, would be able to return in the full force and glory of the Theran Empire.
Yes, because
there was a problem, though, wasn't there?
Yeah. A, some horrors went with them, and B, they went into astral space where not all horrors had left already. So it was just I can't quite call it a free-for-all, but that was, you saw that going differently in your head type plan. So that didn't quite work out well. So during the 400 years of the Scourge, the horrors were there all over it, and they were there from day 1, and they were there, year 400. So they kind of set up camp in Parlainth and realized, that ritual magic was powerful enough. We're here for the long haul. We can't get back any quicker than we want to. Someone has to bring us back if we're in this city.
Yes.
And so they found creative ways to pass the time.
Yes, and it is actually important to note that the isolation of the city was not necessarily perfect or complete, because we talked about Longing Ring last episode. The despair thought that was in Gerol's head was in Parlainth. part of the reason that he was that the horror, like one of the aspects of the plot was that the horror recognized that the ring would lead to the city being brought back, and so was trying to, rather than its normal thing of driving Gerol to suicide, wanted Gerol to succeed in releasing it from its and all
prison
of its
of Parlainth.
compatriots. Yeah, from its prison. So it had the ability to bridge that astral barrier in order to do its thing. So, while the memory of Parlainth had been wiped, and so nobody really knew of its existence, it was still there, and there was still a connection, however tenuous it might be, between the prosaic, mundane physical world and whatever place that it was secreted away.
Yes. It is a fascinating setting to play around in. There's only one, air quotes, safe place to be anywhere near there. But once you enter the walls of Parlainth, man, you are in a horror movie upon horror movie upon horror movie.
Yes.
So pick your poison. But Haven was carved out a few years ago by Torgak and his crew. And they kind of set up shop and they kind of fortified this little tiny offshoot, kind of the dot over the I of Parlainth. And they made a, again, air quotes, safe place to be, knowing that the big bad nasties are literally just over the wall, right there. I can't even say down the block, but down the block right there. And so it's kind of like living next to an airport. You know that something big is going to come over that wall soon. You just don't know when. And that's it. But so there's a ripe array of characters in and around Haven itself before you even get to the weird archaeological madness that is Parlainth.
Yeah, Haven is an adventurer's boomtown.
Yeah. Think Tombstone from the movie. It's just everything pops up and all kinds of businesses change hands. There's a couple of regulars that have a firm foothold on what you can and cannot do in businesses that they're running there. But it's everything else is kind of changing hands rather rapidly. And so if you have a boxed set of Parlainth, you are in for a special treat. If you don't, see if you can get one somewhere on eBay or whatnot. I'm pretty sure are the downloads available from FossilGames.com?
Yes, yep. Everything that is in that box is available in PDF. So that is, if you can't get anything else, that is one place to go. But actually, somebody posted as of this recording today on the Earthdawn Guild Facebook group that they had come across a still plastic wrapped copy of the Parlainth boxed set and got it for a song. I think they paid $10 for it, but it was like $15 shipping. And they were like, I was never happier to pay more for shipping than for the actual thing I bought.
No kidding. Because it's 25 years old. And you pretty much got it for the price it came out for. I mean, it was $30 in 1993 or 5 or whatever. Mm-hmm. So you pretty much just got it for cost at this point. So and you actually got it away with $5.
Parlainth itself is a real, campaign setting. Like, the box presents everything that you need, and you can run an entire multiple circle game out of Parlainth and the stuff that's going on there without needing to even venture tremendously far outside its walls.
No, the source book inside the box set is black covered Aztec designs. It really takes a glaring light to bring it to you. It is 67 pages of nothing but setting and people and things you can do and treasures and monsters and beasties and so forth.
And presents options. Like, as it goes through the various sections, like, it says, here are, 2 or 3 different options that you can choose in terms of how things might be in the reality of your own campaign for this.
Totally.
Is Torgak's treasure really secreted away in a vault underneath his store? Or are the rumors of his vast wealth over-exaggerated in that most of it is sunk into the actual building and supplies and stuff that are there, and he's not sitting on a king's ransom of actual gold and silver? Yeah.
And that's just some of the ones in Haven. If you actually get into the knee-deep into Parlainth, past the singing fountain, which is creepy, into some other catacombs, east, north, west, and south, it has options on, is this what the horror is doing? Or is this what the horror is doing? Or is this what the horror is doing? And so it's
and there's a lot of space within that setting for a game master to develop their own, like have their own areas and develop their own characters and storylines and stuff, because it's a ruined city, but it is a city, and that is a very large area. And broadly speaking, it's divided up into some sections that each kind of have their own theme and focus. But there is absolutely room and plenty of places for a game master to plop their own stuff down. Unlike to draw a sort of D&D parallel, unlike, say, Undermountain, which is like the mega dungeon of the Forgotten Realms, okay? Which is extensively, or at least the upper levels of it are kind of extensively mapped out. And while there are sections of it, I think that are kind of left empty for DMs to do their own thing with, it is still largely like square by square mapped out. Right. And that's not the case with Parlainth. That's not really the case with Earthdawn in general. That's actually one of the things that I have always kind of appreciated about that, to take a slight detour here, is that the maps that are presented, not only like the province-wide maps like of Barsaive itself, but of like the cities and the underground complexes and dungeons and things like that, are not graph paper masterpieces. Like, they are very moody and quite often presented, like a lot of other things, as in-setting stuff.
Somebody made this who was there, and maybe it's not the world's most accurate thing.
And that it's there more to give you a sense of the general layout rather than a tactical bit that you will load out on your tabletop and
game table,
map out your templates and minis and stuff. I mean, that's fine. That is unfortunately, I think, maybe as well a little bit of a mismatch between the sort of old school range and facing mechanics that are kind of presented in the combat chapter and with spells and things, and maps that are not to that degree of tactical accuracy. I tend to be more theater of the mind and play a little bit fast and loose with ranges and stuff like that, kind of going with what works in terms of the story and the emotions and the needs of the moment, rather than, than that. But the Parlainth kind of epitomizes that as the poster map that is in the Parlainth box, is
2 feet by 3 feet.
But it is a replica of the map wall. And what the map wall is it's a big section of stone wall in Haven on which people have basically like painted an outline of the city walls, and then everybody goes and paints their own like map stuff on it. But there's like no agreed upon scale. Some people use one color to represent the surface and another the catacombs, and so forth. There's no agreed upon like what the various symbols mean, and so. It's the concerns of, we're gonna, and the inserts that are with it, like that have the maps and whatnot, are all kind of along similar lines, is that there's not the old school D&D like mapping, okay, we go 30 feet and then the corridor turns 90 degrees right, and we, like there's not that sense of things. It is a lot more fluid and loose in terms of stuff like that, which, can be a plus or a minus depending on your particular style. I think it's a plus.
Yeah, I do as well. The amount of stuff in the box set is just overwhelmingly detailed and a beautiful thing to look at, because Vartigal's contracts are in there. All the handouts you could give the players look like they're on parchment. And they look like a whole separate font was used to describe all these things. And if you go to Vartigal's Lore Exchange and you buy stuff, I made my players sign as their characters on those forms and hand them back over to me. So I had them in the book. And so it was one of those, oh, no, you said, and I could whip out that contract if I needed to. But the legend cards in full color with the the creature stats on the back, or the legend stats on the back for the items you could pick up, the straw men, the false men, the Jehuthra that was in there, deceivers, those things are creepy looking.
The scurriers.
All of this all scurriers, I couldn't remember their name as well. All of that in there is just wonderful things to have to immerse yourself into the feeling of what Parlainth is. And that's before you actually have the player characters cross that double door threshold of big white stone from Haven, past the map wall, which is 20 feet away, into the laneway of Parlainth, because it's built on, it's
more of a trapezoid
a type rectangle. Yeah, trapezoid. And it's
a parallelogram.
So there's a laneway from upper left to lower right and lower left to upper right. That's an X with the singing fountain.
The screaming fountain, you mean?
Before the Scourge was before the Scourge was the singing fountain, and after the Scourge is now the screaming fountain, which of course just
at various times will raise a ruckus and drive people that are near it a little bit batty.
Insane.
And there is potentially some kind of connection between it and like the level of activity that is proceeding and the actual like threat of assault on Haven itself.
Yes.
And then those laneways basically divide the city up into 4 quarters.
Yes. Above ground quarters, because below ground is a whole
right, but even the below ground quarters are roughly divided as well along those lines.
Yes.
But so going clockwise, so Haven is on the southeastern corner of the ruins and is built sort of partially in the ruins and then has sections of it that are outside the city proper. But then going clockwise around from Haven, above ground you've got the Twists, which is an area where all of the streets are kind of curved, and each of these districts in the original plan of the city had a purpose and stuff, and I'm going to recommend at this point, if you want to get more into depth on Parlainth, track down the live From Barsaive series of episodes. They did like 3 or 4 episodes on Parlainth and go into a lot more depth than we are going into here. Chad and Rachel did that.
Yes.
So you've got the Twists, which is an area that has a lot of, like, it was an area that during the Scourge, a lot of the magical research into ways to potentially fight off the horrors and whatnot took place. So there's a lot of bizarre magical stuff that kind of happens there. And the streets are all kind of round, curved, and twisting and so forth, which is why it's called the Twists. That's sort of the southern district. The western district is called the War Zone, because basically at that point it was the area that after they had killed all of the people, the horrors to entertain themselves corrupted false men and basically set up like toy war games, like use them as toy armies to play back and forth games against each other. And it's largely, most of the stuff there is just ruins and destruction, with roving bands of straw men and wax men with commanders and generals of more powerful false men. The northern section is the vaults, I think it's called. That is the area that is the domain of Charcoal Grin, who is a dragon that has taken up residence and claimed that part of the ruins as her domain, and her underlings and servants called the Unforgivables. And that is the district that was the sort of administrative section. And Charcoal Grin herself layers in the former Imperial Palace. And then that's the northern,
because when you're
a dragon, that's what you do. And then the eastern section, coming back around, like I said, clockwise, is the Smalls, which was primarily the residential district. But all of the houses and so forth there are all kind of tight quarters and very kind of like grid layout, but because of the destruction and the barricades and stuff of people that did stuff during the Scourge, it is very actually kind of difficult to navigate from point A to point B, because you often need to double back or clear stuff out of the way or cut through a ruined building and all of the potential problems that can go along with that. So like each of those areas has its own kind of flavor and idea to it. And then beneath each of those are catacombs, the underlevels, which are a lot less clearly defined, intentionally, I think, to give game masters more room to develop their own stuff and have them in there. Obviously, each of them sort of has a purpose, like the catacombs under the Smalls, the eastern catacombs, are primarily the domain of Twiceborn, the Tiskrang cadaver woman, and who is the self-styled queen of the Parlainth's Cadaver Man group, or at least the
Yes.
sentient, the comparatively sane ones, as opposed to the, more feral ones that you might find in other parts of the ruins.
Yeah. This is you could pretty much, if your team survives, and that's the thing, if your party survives, you could just kind of keep them in Haven, dabbling into Parlainth back and forth for a number of adventures.
It is a campaign setting. You can absolutely, like we said earlier, run an entire campaign of multiple circles out of Parlainth, and not. I mean, that's in one sense what the Legends of Barsaive adventures are. It is a campaign story arc that is set in Haven and in Parlainth, and occasionally ventures outside. Like we have one that does involve the group traveling to Caer Idolon and into Bloodwood at one point. But then you've got Mists of Betrayal, which starts off in the outskirts of Parlainth and then kind of ventures again from there to Bloodwood. You've got the Parlainth Adventures book, which has 3 or 4 adventures and gives ideas about things that can go on. And then there are a whole bunch of adventure seeds and stuff like that in the box set, in the campaign book itself, that you can use. So there is plenty of stuff there. And despite the strong presence of the horrors within the history of Parlainth, and that are still in some places lurking in the ruins, it is not necessarily, it doesn't have to be a purely high circle character area. Because it is so open and free, it's probably wiser in the early, stages to maybe not be venturing too far outside of outside of Haven. But again, the Legends of Barsaive adventures give an interesting variety of experiences and things like that you can do with the city and the types of stuff you can do there.
Yeah, I didn't take I was running the Parlainth box set with the Parlainth Adventures book. As I said, I've done most of the pre-gens because I thought this was the way to do it. Because if you're going to give me 4 adventures I can run in Parlainth, let's just do those. That takes a lot of work off of some work. It was still a lot to absorb of the information for Parlainth. But I didn't even bring my characters to Parlainth until they hit 4th circle. And that was where I specifically detailed their riverboat passage up, and then their land passage through the jungle and up through the mountains, around this and around that, and they could see the ever-going storm above one corner of Parlainth, and that was their first hint that they actually saw the dragon flying into its lair, and that was their first ever sighting of a dragon, because I specifically have been holding them off all this time from actually having seen one, and so I made sure that they noticed that, and then got them in through the gates and the whole 9 yards, because I had done this whole big setup to draw them to Parlainth on purpose. So I waited a long time to get them there. And then I ran them through the 4 adventures in the order that I chose to do them. But it was, not everybody survived going into Parlainth, and not everybody survived getting back out of Haven. So it was a very fun place to set it and to run all these other characters and do all the myriad things that they could do, because it was a whole new set of things for them to combat, a whole bunch of new horrors and undead and all kinds of things. So, and then on top of the dark adventure and danger of the ruins itself, you've got the personalities and people of Haven and the various goals and objectives and so forth, representatives, got not only the local power of Torgak and his associates, you've got interests, of course, from the Kingdom of Thrall, as well as Thera and Bloodwood, because there's a lot of valuable lore and treasure and magic items and so forth that are in the ruins, and powerful things that, would be a useful reward, a useful tool for any kind of individual who can get a hold of them. And sometimes perhaps the only way to learn the appropriate information for a key knowledge is to find it lurking somewhere in the ruins in a forgotten library or something along those lines. So even if you don't
necessarily set an entire campaign out of it, it is absolutely something, especially if you're going to have a game that may be more in the horror avenue, is something that would be of interest.
Yeah, I ran all 4 from there, and my party was just kind of like, okay, we've had enough of Parlainth. This is nowhere we want to be again anytime soon. So they were more than happy to hit the trail after they were all done with that, because a lot of things happened, and a lot of money was lost, and a lot of money was made, not necessarily in that order. And things were found. People
lost,
were left behind because characters didn't quite make it. So it's a wonderful little change up from just going to this little shanty town and that little shanty town. Parlainth is a different town altogether. There's nothing else in the setting quite like it.
Nope.
So
absolutely,
recommend it highly as much as possible. So
if you are looking for an old school dungeon crawly, like mega setting where you can just venture into places and kill stuff, Parlainth is definitely something that you want to look at. You do need to be a little bit careful, kind of like what we talked about the other week with horrors, in terms of them being a dangerous opponent. Venturing into the ruins of Parlainth generally should be something that you approach with at least some degree of planning and concern. And, the research and investigation phase of things, like learning as much as you can about where you're going before you go there, because people who just kind of venture randomly into the ruins tend to get themselves killed. Because not only are there still horrors lurking around, you've got the myriad traps that were set by the residents of Parlainth back during the Scourge to try and protect areas from the horrors, that may have been triggered but have been reset by Scurriers, which are minor horrors that lurk in the ruins and really enjoy resetting traps.
Both magical and mundane, yes.
Both magical and mundane, because they kind of derive sustenance from the pain that
trapped people encounter.
They sort of link to the trap, and they trap people, and they kind of derive sustenance from that. And so, again, sort of like a dark adventure. There is certainly some heroic, but really kind of epitomizes the Earthdawn themes of the forgotten past and exploring and discovering lost knowledge and treasures and things like that. Is certainly something that features very highly in Parlainth.
And it's not to be undertaken lightly, because the main thing I'll tell any game master or any player if they're going to go down Parlainth Road is it is a resource plan, because once you cross those gates, you are on your own. There are no stops along the way to resupply anything. Food, water, shelter, healing potions, nothing like that. So you go in with what you came with, and you better get out with what you came with. That's pretty much it. So it's a resource plan for the game master to know where everything is supposed to be, how many traps are there, how many monsters you're going to throw at them, so forth, until they get back out again. Because if they need to go back down that laneway into Haven to get out, the guards are going to charge them once they enter those gates. To go, oh yeah, we see you coming. We'll open the gates for you, but if anything's following behind you, you're on your own. So it's not your typical underground dungeon crawl, because there's open sky unless you go to the catacombs, but it is a completely different dungeon crawl the Earthdawn way, and that's a very high mark. So
like so many other things in Earthdawn, it takes a classic fantasy gaming archetype and slants it or twists it a little bit to make it something better, special, very recognizable, but special and unique in its own way.
Again, can't recommend highly enough. We should stop gushing about Parlainth, because it is a fantastic campaign setting. And every once in a while, I threaten to take my party back there, and they go along with whoever else I tell, so they don't have to go back to Parlainth, because that was a slog for them. They earned their stripes on that series of adventures back and forth, and they got a lot of legend points for it, as they should have. So they deserved every one of them. Anyway, now that we've killed roughly half an hour or more, we can move on to our second topic of the evening and talk about a few things mechanical, as far as we've really kind of glossed over how weapons and armor mechanics kind of work in the 4th edition. They're pretty simple. We shouldn't be long on this one, but yeah, we don't have any questions for it. We haven't got any questions for it. It's pretty straightforward, but we should probably at least cover the basics of weapons and armor in this game, because I know my favorite bit of information about it is Obsidian can only wear living armor. So that's fun.
Right. That's because Obsidian, and we haven't talked about them as a race in an episode yet, but they have natural armor. And so as a balance to that, they can only wear certain types of armor to enhance their natural ability, and what are called living armors. They're basically magical in one sense or another. In
Earthdawn, we've got regular good old-fashioned armor and weapons, and then we've got magical armor and weapons. We can kind of distinguish those two right there. You've got your...
Yeah, we'll go into more detail about the magical aspect of things in a later episode, because that certainly deserves some focus of its own. But basically the idea being, for the most part, that magical weapons and armor will provide you additional bonuses to damage in the case of weapons, or defensive capability or armors, but they typically also have some other abilities or bonuses or things like that they will provide as well. Like, for example, a suit of armor that is magical as a result of its either was because it was deliberately made for a thief adept, or because it was strongly associated with a thief adept and so has developed powers connected to that, may provide, in addition to just better armor protection, might provide bonuses to stealthy stride, or to lock picking, or to disarm traps, depending on the story of the thief in question and what might have been going on there. And weapons, the same way, while they will frequently have increases to the damage that they do, may provide bonuses to attack tests, or may provide for a point of strain, you can basically light the sword on fire, the way that you would if an elementalist cast flame weapon on it. So that, we'll go into more details in a later episode on exactly how that whole thing works with magic items. But that's, when you're talking about thread weapons and armor, they just basically do the same stuff that we're going to talk about here now, just a little bit more.
So unlike D&D's THAC0, to hit armor class 0, armor doesn't change your number to be hit like D&D does. So in Earthdawn, armor is there merely as a protection. Your physical defense is one thing, and your physical armor is different. And your spell defense is one. They are they're linked, but they're independent values. Your physical defense, which is based off of your dexterity, is how difficult you are to get hit. Physical armor, then, if you do get hit, basically reduces the amount of damage that you will take from the blow. So the more armor that you have, the higher your physical armor rating, or mystic armor, if it provides a mystic armor bonus and it's a mystic attack, will reduce the damage. So if you get hit by a sword, and the attacker rolls 12 on their damage, and you have hardened leather armor, which has a physical armor rating of 5, you subtract that 5 from the 12, and you actually only take 7 points of damage. And that is the case regardless of that. So, and that's the same for spell defense and mystic armor all across the board. Right. There's only one thing that's different is there's a social defense, but there's no social armor. So, one of those things. Because the social interaction rules have their own thing that's going on that we may talk about in another episode as well. So the thing I want to point out is, in all the other previous 3 editions of Earthdawn, we had something called armor defeating hits. And in 4th edition, we don't. So just in case, because we've had a lot of people say, I'm finally getting back into Earthdawn for the first time in X number of years, we can kind of quickly run down the differences to why we got away, why it was beneficial to, and I know we've covered this before, but just in case, we get rid of armor defeating hits. Yeah, we have. In previous editions, basically, if you rolled above a certain threshold of your target's physical defense, you would completely bypass their armor. It was an all or nothing affair. It didn't matter how, setting aside certain abilities that might have increased the difficulty of that threshold. If you broke that threshold, whatever it happened to be, didn't matter how much armor
that they had on, whether they were in just simple leather, whether they were in a suit of full crystal plate. They, if you beat that threshold, then the armor did not reduce the damage at all. It was sort of the Earthdawn equivalent of critical hits. The problem that comes up with that is that as the attack steps increase, and they increase generally faster than the defense ratings do outside of things like Avoid Blow, there would come a point where it would be reliable that characters who are not physically focused, spellcasters, some of the specialist classes or whatnot, who are not necessarily have a high dexterity, would basically reliably, any time that they would get hit, would have an armor defeating hit, and so it wouldn't really matter what armor that they had on, because the armor wouldn't really do much of anything. There were, ways around that with group patterns where you could boost your physical defense and things like that, but for the most part, that's, even those were limited to a certain extent. So if you're going up against an opponent that has a high attack, and you don't have a great defense, the armor is not really going to end up doing much good for you. And so it kind of mechanically disincentivized the idea of the slower but strong and more heavily armored fighter type that the Obsidian really epitomized in one sense. But in 4th edition, rather than having an all or nothing, basically each threshold, each additional success over the target just basically defaults to dealing additional damage, which will, in theory, help overcome whatever armor that the target is wearing. It still means that a low physical defense is not ideal, because it's still going to... But if you've got a low physical defense, then you can wear heavier armor. I mean, it's easier to hit you, but you can wear heavier armor, and it will at least in some sense mitigate the damage that you'll be taking from that. And then the other thing that we tweaked is that shields, instead of adding additional armor, which is what they did in previous editions, now add to defense. So that the armor ratings don't tend to be quite as high as they were in previous editions, but physical defense ratings tend to maybe be a little bit higher for those characters that are using a shield.
So,
which actually means that Obsidian suddenly have become quite a bit more effective in combat, because they will typically won't be wearing much in the way of armor, at least at low circles, because they'll just have their natural armor, but they will typically be carrying a big shield, which gives them a decent physical defense bonus, helping somewhat overcome their slightly lower dexterity and lower...
You're big and slow and easy to hit.
and so an Obsidian with reasonable physical defense, and especially a magic shield, is going to become suddenly a lot harder to do significant damage to. And I kind of like how that has changed the way that they feel in play. They no longer feel quite so much as the melee glass cannon, where if they are able to get in and get a hit, they'll do a lot of damage because they're really strong. But if somebody hits them, they're gonna tend to they will suffer. I mean, they tend to have higher toughnesses and whatnot anyway, but their low armor generally, because they don't have as many armor choices, cause some problems. So I think it works out. I think it works out well. So that's the situation with armor, and kind of why we made the changes, which you talked about there before.
So armor always works, because it was always difficult for me to explain how an armor defeating hit got past Blood Pebble.
Yeah, I mean, the Blood Pebble did not necessarily cover every square inch of a person's body. Like, there would not be any Blood Pebble on the person's head, for instance, and probably not on necessarily in the joints, where other armor is weaker. They probably would not have as many, as much there. But I don't know. It's a different approach. I think
that got nitpicky for me on occasion to say, because there's no where did it hit you on the body, because it's part of the cinematic storytelling of, did it go bypass your Blood Pebble armor, because it's not. So I like the fact in 4th edition, I've come around to it a lot, which is I love the
I mean, that's it.
I love that chart. It was a great thing to use. However, to your point that you've made at least a number of times on this podcast alone, which is, your armor should always count.
Yeah.
That's why you wear it. And whether or not you're wearing a helmet or not is kind of irrelevant. There's no, body part that we're hitting for, cinematically speaking. There's no chart to use on where they hit you. If you want to tell that story, go ahead.
I mean, yeah, and at that point, yeah, I tend to be one who is a bit more like roll the dice and see what the results are, and then kind of narrate what happens as a result of those rolls. So if somebody gets if somebody hits and gets a really, really good damage result, that's, okay, well, in that case, well, maybe they did a scalp wound or something like that, or, something along those lines. I mean, I've played systems like Rollmaster and stuff that have hit locations and like extensive charts and whatnot. And they're fun after a fashion, but it's not my particular style. Hey, if you're into that, go for it.
I am. I found a chart online many years ago. Body part charts. It was based on a D10, so real simple.
You can even get dice these days, like a D12 that have like the different body parts as the various faces.
Leg, torso. Yeah, I've got them just in case I didn't ever find my charts. But I tweaked them because it was basically for humans, and then I tweaked one for Tiskrang because they have a tail you can hit, and I tweaked one for Windlings because they have wings you can hit.
No, that's cool.
Harder, so I just redistributed those. Yeah, so I did that along those lines, and somebody had really good mechanics for if a dwarf is attacking a troll, pretty much, they're not going to be able to get from the chest up, really, or if the troll is attacking the dwarf, it's kind of a different thing because they're not really going to be able to leg sweep them a whole lot, so they just roll a d6, and these are the body parts you can possibly hit. So I co-opted those for my table, but I want to come back to this thing about shields, because I remember in 3rd edition that there was something about blocking with a shield that I think I tried to look it up earlier today and I failed miserably, but I know you were part of 3rd edition a little bit.
Yes.
And so you could actually roll some dice and actually try and block the incoming attack with a shield.
Yeah, what 3rd edition did was they had both an avoid blow and parry as separate talents. And
that's what I was thinking.
The idea was, I guess, that avoid blow would be just for dodging or physically avoiding the attack, and then parry was a separate talent that would involve, as opposed to dodging, would involve blocking, whether with a shield or parrying with your weapon.
Yes.
Obviously, because parry is no longer in 4th edition, I felt that was an unnecessary level of mechanical difference.
Detail.
And that avoid blow is just a single talent that allows you to, whether it is to dodge or parry or some other way of preventing the attack from hurting you.
Gotcha.
So that's why I did that.
It's no worries. My players have done enough of live action role playing and theater that they had done some stage combat, and so they were wanting to be able to block something instead and basically hold that attack there. So we tried to do a twist or a knack on riposte. We tried to do a twist or a knack on the parry, and then so we wrote our own homebrewed rules, and then we found parry in the 3rd edition and said, "Look, we had the exact same mechanics that they did."
And at that point, basically you've got two talents that are doing the same thing.
Yes.
That, basically that being trying to prevent an attack from landing and doing damage. I don't think you need two separate talents that I don't even know. I think parry might have potentially had some kind of bonus to it based on the weapon you were using. I don't remember now, but
I don't either, and that's the thing. It's been many years since I had to pull that memory out.
You have avoid blow, and then you can narrate the result of whether you are dodging or sidestepping or blocking or parrying the attack. And then the riposte talent on its own included that. It makes sense to be different because in addition to the defensive capability of, do I prevent the attack from landing, it also provides the offensive counter-strike to that. So I think, avoid blow as any kind of defensive measure against a physical attack. It doesn't matter whether you are blocking it with your shield or, parrying it with your sword or stepping out of the way. It's all the same result. You don't need to have, 4 different talents that work functionally the same.
No, fair. Like I said, I wanted to bring that up in case anybody was a holdover from 3rd edition for that blocking possibility. I think we just wrote it down as a combat option and not necessarily a talent, but I would need to go back to my notes.
Sure.
But anyway, like I said, because the rules for shields changed the armor rating into a defensive... I lost my word a minute ago.
In 4th edition, shields provide a physical defense bonus now instead of a... Like that, the blocking with a shield is now built into the mechanics of them, like the typical role that they play in terms of a defensive aspect that is common to role-playing games. Historical use of shields potentially notwithstanding.
Yeah. So that's a whole different thing. And then remind me if shattering a shield is still in the rules.
Should be.
Looked up the rules on that anytime soon as a combat option. So I know there's a shatter threshold usually built in.
I mean, if the shatter threshold is on the shield equipment list, then it is still an option. So
yes, page 435. So that is still there. Yay, good for me. Nobody in my party right now is using a shield, so I had to ask that question for anybody else. So because it needed to be asked.
Yeah, the rules for shattering a shield are on page 385 of the player's guide under combat options.
There we go. Yes. So, okay. It was still there. Sorry, folks. I need to be thorough, and I need to be thorough for the listeners, not just me and my party. So, one of those things. But yeah, so really, I don't think any major changes happened to any of the weapon damages or hand sizes or anything along those lines.
No, not really. No. Like, the basic idea of weapons that they have a like minimum strength that is required for the character to wield them effectively. They have a size which determines whether they are one-handed or two-handed for a particular name giver race, and then they have a damage step. Roughly speaking, the damage step kind of scales with the size. You know, larger weapons do more base damage. Some of them have special capabilities like entangling an opponent or stuff like that. I didn't really look at the numbers on all of the sort of secondary numbers on the chart in terms of making weapons, like the costs and weights and all of that stuff. I didn't really look at those all that closely.
No, it's okay.
It's mainly does the damage scale with size appropriately, and just kind of went from there.
My favorite was always that the quarterstaff gave you a +1 physical defense in close combat. That was just my all-time favorite, because it was one of those little rules in 1st edition, I think even 2nd edition, 3rd, that, yeah, if you were using a quarterstaff, you got a +1 physical defense.
Huh. Okay. I'm not saying it wasn't the case, but it's not something that I remember. It might have been something in either 2nd or 3rd edition, because I'm pretty sure that was not the case in 1st. Because I had a warrior that I played in a game who used a quarterstaff as his weapon, at least starting out, and I don't recall there being a defense bonus because of that.
No, it's when you... so I'm looking at page 407 now. Quarterstaff. Wielder adds a +1 physical defense when using defensive stance combat option.
Is that...
So that's what that is. 4th edition.
Is it?
Yeah. Page 407, right there.
Oh, when using... Okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, when you're in a defensive stance.
Yeah, we have to be using that combat option. Okay. Yep.
Yes.
Okay,
so that was the part I forget until
the quarterstaff. The quarterstaff is visually sort of an iconic weapon, like but in terms of its, I think the 4th edition version of it is better. I don't remember what the early stats of it were now off the top of my head. It's either.
That's why we make tables and write it down. So.
I do remember being somewhat disappointed that with the restrictions on Forge Blade and stuff like that, the quarterstaff in 1st edition was really kind of a crummy weapon. Like, I think its base damage might have only been 2 or 3.
I think you're right.
Which meant that it couldn't even, because of the rule that got introduced about you couldn't forge a weapon more than its base damage step, meant that even fully forged, it wasn't as good as a sword.
Yes.
You know, those were sort of the early inklings of my feelings towards story over simulation. going
Fair.
like a character who fights with a quarterstaff and is super effective with it is like a common thing, and the game rules did not support that.
Fair. I applaud you, and I appreciate you changing that, because now quarterstaff is a step 4. So, like I said, but just I love the fact that not only are there swords and spears,
and now there is no, and now we did away with the forging restrictions from forge weapon. So you can forge a quarterstaff as much as you can forge anything else, and effectively make them all pretty decent weapons.
And we will not go down the forge.
That the idea of the staff ended up kind of being like, oh, the staff is not a weapon as it is so much a thing that a spellcaster carries as a symbol of their power, kind of the magical staff thing from D&D, Gandalf and his staff, as opposed to, and Gandalf kicked butt with his staff. At least certainly in the movies, he clocked plenty of things over the head with it. But yeah, I'm
no, Bruce Lee with a quarterstaff is a whole lot more dangerous than some guys with a sword. So yes, there's some legacy aspects to some of the numbers and stuff in the weapons that, if I'm completely honest, I'm not crazy about. Fair.
And that, again, because it was the first book and I didn't really feel the need to examine them too closely.
That's all right. Most of those were not broken in the first place.
Yeah,
and
no,
like
I mean,
for forged weapon,
for the
that changed what could be done with them, so that automatically kind of leveled the playing field there. My only other thought was I happen to have all of the 3rd edition books, which means I have the Cathay player's book, and that has a whole different slew of weapons in there that I would not mind introducing to my players once upon a time, but Cathay is a whole separate beast that, like forged weapon, we won't go down that path too far.
If I'm perfectly honest, like, I kind of need to ask myself, really, what is the difference? Like, there is very little functional difference between a broadsword and a scythe and axe. Right? They're both size 3. They're both strength minimum 12. They're both damage step 5. The difference between them is they both weigh 4 pounds. Yes. The difference is the scythe and axe cost 20 silver while the broadsword costs 25. Like, at that point you go to, like, it's the, why does AD&D's weapons chart have 15 different varieties of polearm?
Yeah, I agree. This is getting out of
there is a degree of crunch. There is a level of there is a false granularity there that I just sometimes not all the time, but sometimes just kind of, like, if I sit there and think about it, just kind of like sits with me the wrong way. Now, admittedly, the scythe and axe was not in the original 1st edition weapons list. I don't think
so either.
I think it was something that was added in later. I think it might have been introduced maybe in the Thrall Source book. I don't know.
Sounds right.
It might have been in the original rule book.
Mine's not.
But again, the difference between them is that a broadsword is easier to come by and slightly more expensive.
Yeah.
At that point, like, why don't you have
because you can stab with a sword, you can't stab with an axe. That's pretty much it.
Granted, now, the scythe and axe does, by its existence and its description, build out the setting a little bit. Like, this is the axe that was used by the dwarves of Scytha, and it is special in this way, and it has this kind of, like, whatever. But there's a... the term that I used earlier, a false granularity. Like, it seems like there is more difference because of the number of things on the list than there actually is. And I think some of the things are on there from, like, legacy expectations of what sorts of weapons you will see on a weapon chart in a game. Like, you've got your 3 or 4 different kinds of swords based on size. You've got your combat axes, the hand axe, the two-handed battle axe. You've got your quarterstaff. You've got your polearms. You've got your, like... You've got this variety of stuff there, but the actual range of numbers that is being played with, like, why don't you just...
can they be? Sure.
Like a size 3 weapon is base damage step 5, and here are examples of what that could be.
Yeah, it's a different way to rearrange the same chart.
And again, this is not like this feels perhaps a little bit like nitpicky, and I understand like the legacy and the tabletop, the fantasy RPG roots that this develops from. But it's just one of those things that you look at it and I think, I think about it for a little bit and I just go, that just, yeah.
I'm okay with that. So as part of the weapons and armor discussion, we've covered a lot of the weapons actually, and one or two in detail. Armor. Again, I love the fact that there are some specific armors to Earthdawn that you don't find in other places. I mean, you got your simple plate mail, you got your ring mail, you got your leather, your padded leather, and your hide. Then you get into the weird ones that aren't necessarily typical for other games. You get living crystal, blood pebble, and then obsidian skin.
Obsidian skin, yeah. The armor has the advantage that there are two ratings. That there's the physical and it's got sort of three things really that are coming into play. The physical armor rating, the mystic armor rating, and the initiative penalty, because heavier armors penalize your initiative, meaning that you will act later in the combat round, typically. And that having those three values allows a greater degree of control and granularity, that it doesn't feel like you are repeating yourself. Like there is a difference. It feels like there is an actual difference beyond just like the price between hardened leather and hide armor, both of which provide physical armor 5, but the hide armor as a more natural thing, and I think is it considered a living armor?
No,
I'm not sure, but provides a bit of a mystic armor bonus that the hardened leather doesn't. And so and then like blood pebble, which is also physical armor 5, but has mystic armor 3,
And then
and so there's
the other one I forgot, Fernweave.
And then Fernweave, which is sort of the lighter, magical armor and stuff. So there's
it's like living vines crawling all over you. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've got the typical like progression of like soft leather, hard leather, like ring mail, chain mail, plate mail. Like you've got that kind of typical fantasy progression of armor types. But then interspersed with that, you've got, and here are some more exotic ones like Fernweave, like Blood Pebble, like Living Crystal, that maybe have the same physical armor as another type, but have mystic armor bonus that goes along with it and are exotic and kind of flesh out the setting. So I've never had the problem with armors the way that I do with melee weapons, in the sense that it just feels like there's more variety than the numbers actually support. And then, because there are more numbers and consequently more dials that you can play with.
I like the armor list more so than the weapons list, because the weapons list is I can't call it standard, but it's pretty standard across most of your fantasy games. Swords, axes, pole arms, quarterstaff, whip, yay. But in Earthdawn, you've got that slightly elongated armor list that includes, things like wyvern skin. That's just a little bit different than you're expecting to find right off the bat, because that's the normal, typical armor list. It's not like it's a hidden treasure somewhere, wyvern skin. You can find that, maybe, if you're in the right city.
I mean, it's expensive. It's super expensive and rare.
But it can be found because it's on the darn list. So it's not like it's hidden behind it's a magical thing, or it's a magical item to attain later on that only special people get. No, it's, if you can find the right city, if you have the right amount of coin, you can get it. And it's slightly more attainable than, thread armor and thread weapons and things like that. So what do you think? We beat this horse long enough? Is it dead?
I think,
I think we covered some of the mechanics. I mean, the wherewithal about armor and weapons.
Yeah, we covered the mechanics. We covered some of the setting aspects. We talked about a couple of the things that are not by any stretch of the imagination like deal breakers or bad things. Just the kind of stuff that has occasionally been remarked upon, and that as when I am like sitting in quiet moments and for some reason thinking about it, can kind of go, like. As I tinker with variations in my own mind, what would I do different? How would I approach that in my own design and stuff like that?
I meant to dust off my crossbow rules to run them by you, but I didn't think that far ahead. So I said a couple of episodes ago that I
yeah.
rewrote crossbow rules for basically the step system for another game, but I needed to look them over myself before I even presented them to you, because I'm like, yeah, let's wait on that. So, because crossbows is a whole separate thing.
I don't want to get into the bow and crossbow.
No, it's okay.
Damage discussion. I think we've discussed it on the show previously, and I understand from a certain point of view why people might want to do it the way they do, but I think it adds an unnecessary
level of complexity.
Layer of complexity.
Yeah. So we're not going to give Josh a stroke. At least I'm not going to give Josh a stroke by asking him about that or following that down that path. Kind of like the forged weapon. We're not going to go down.
I talked about. I think somebody asked a question about it in an email, and I talked about it.
So we're good. Covered. End of story. Have a nice day. We're going to wrap up the podcast now.
We're all
past an hour, so we're good.
Yeah, we're all suited up. We're going to close up shop here for the night.
We're all good here. Fine. And how are you? From Star Wars. So other than that, folks, it is the end of this one, episode 23, I think.
Yeah. 3.
Jeez.
Yeah, 23 is in the bag. We can. I'm actually surprised. I was a little bit surprised that we ended up breaking an hour on that, even with the stuff.
No, it's okay. Otherwise, folks, I thank Josh for making the time, and please.
And I thank Dan for joining me.
I'm happy to be here.
I thank all of you for listening and supporting the game, and continuing to help keep that energy going.
At this point, you have about maybe 1 week left on the Kickstarter for the IOPA source book. So by all means,
if you have for some reason not been aware of that, check it out. If you have questions or comments or anything else that you want to send our way, that email address, as always, edsgpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe so that you don't miss an episode, because occasionally I have a power outage and I'm not able to update the Twitter account or the Facebook page right away to say, hey, there's a new episode there.
Technical difficulties?
So if you subscribe, then you will have it in your feed as soon as your particular podcasting client of choice updates. Subscribe. If your podcast catcher allows, rate, review, spread the word
digitally. Don't go spread the word in person. Not.
Or spread the word. We'll spread the word in person too. Yeah, I've done that.
I'm just saying with
I've told people about
COVID-19 thing. So maybe from a 10-foot distance, shout it
from an appropriate social distance.
So otherwise, folks,
and the other places, Twitter, Discord, Facebook, forums, all that sort of stuff, which we talk about every week, and you can find information on those in the show notes. And as of the release of this, at least slide into the end of April, continue on into actual spring and summer.
Hopefully an end to the quarantine soon. So otherwise, folks, we will see you next time, and it's time for you to go make your own legend.
Good night, everybody.